Welcome to the Teachers to Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dean. This is the podcast where we tell you how you can grow your tech skills, whether you're starting from scratch or just want to go farther. You might be thinking about a new job, a whole new career, or just a new hobby. We'll have something for everyone, so keep listening. Welcome to this episode of Teachers to Tech. We're going to move away from computer programming and data topics for a bit and lean more to the media side of technology. Today we'll get into the first of some podcasts that'll introduce you to the basics of many types of video production. As always, my idea here is to get your feet wet by giving you a good overview and getting you started. Once you dig into the sources I've pulled together for you, your horizons are really going to expand quickly. Let's start out with the camera. I'm going to talk a little bit about the camera itself, but not much because this is kind of a rigid parameter. It's not going to change up. It is very flexible. We know there are very nice high-end dedicated video cameras out there. You don't need one to start out though. You will read a little bit about resolution if you absolutely need very high resolution. That's kind of a specialized purchase in itself that you'll want to research more. But the fact of the matter is that there are entire movies shot on iPhones, so you probably have something in your pocket that will work to start out with. What we are interested in mostly is talking about lenses, because this is where some limitations come in quickly. And what I want to address here is the difference between an optical zoom lens and digital zooming on a camera. There are a couple of important differences between optical zoom and digital zoom features on a camera, and I want to break those down for you. The first difference is the effect of the digital zoom, and that's achieved by multiplying the amount of image area occupied by what was a single pixel. So as we say, hey, I'd like to make a 2x zoom here, or I need to get 4 times bigger on my subject, we're multiplying the space that each piece of resolution of that image occupies. So now you are losing resolution. On our modern cameras, that's not as big a problem, but you probably remember in the past on, say, an older phone trying to zoom in on something, and the picture was almost unrecognizable by the time you've zoomed in really close. But the other thing that happens when you use a zoom in that way is you're just kind of stretching the whole picture across the frame that it fills. If you have an optical zoom or an optical telephoto lens, this changes a little bit. When you decide that, hey, I need my subject to, let's say, fill the center of a photo. Maybe it's just a portrait of somebody where we've got their face in the center of the picture. And we decide we're going to zoom our lens in on them. Now we have to back up, right? Because that face gets bigger in the frame. Well, as we back up but zoom in, what happens is the relationship in the picture between that face and that background changes. And if you take a picture where you haven't zoomed in very much on somebody and keep their face in the center of a photo, then you back way up, zoom in on them, not with a digital zoom, but with an optical zoom. When you look at the resulting picture, you'll find that there isn't a lot of background still showing in the picture. And you can use an optical zoom to kind of force that background to be out of focus. And to the viewer, psychologically, that background now becomes less important and less clear. And that makes the person at the center of your photo stand out a lot more. So this is something we can do when we have optical zooming and optical telephoto, but not digital only. And just to be clear, the difference between a telephoto lens and a zoom lens is a zoom lens can change its viewpoint. I could have a zoom lens that really doesn't have any telephoto at all, but that telephoto feature is what makes the lens stronger, bringing things that are far away to look a little bit nearer in the photo. Obviously, I'm going to recommend that you find a camera that lets you do some zooming optically, so if you want that effect, you can get it. I'm not saying you must use it. I'm saying you want to make sure it's available to you if you need it. We'll talk a little bit more about composing your shots just a little bit later, but let's talk about stabilizing that camera. Now, if you're going for a shaky look, maybe documentary feel or, say, a disaster scene, It's great if the camera's a little bit shaky, but otherwise we want to avoid it. I do know that there is image stabilization built into some cameras that will kind of counteract hand motions, but otherwise we want to think about what is going to keep our camera in place at the angle we want it. So first up, you might say, well, Dean, it's really not a problem for me. I am just looking into the camera on my laptop, talking and recording it. So that may not be a big deal for you. The whole table that your laptop is sitting on stabilizes everything. Maybe you're walking and talking and so you don't really care, but otherwise we want something firmly in place. If you have a camera that is separate from your laptop, you're going to be able to think about what angles that you want. So we can start thinking about what height we want to mount that on. And here's a tip. When we're pointing the camera at ourselves or another person who's going to look straight into that camera, a good thing to think about is keep that camera just below eye level so that the person looking into the lens appears to be just slightly above us. And by the way, if you've ever bumped into a celebrity or you've watched a sitcom where there's a celebrity in the plot and you've heard somebody say to them, "You look taller on TV," well, that's why. Because the camera gives you, the viewer, the perspective that you're slightly looking up at that celebrity, newscaster, whoever they are. Just a little aside there. But it is a flattering way to arrange your camera. Now, if we've got that camera that isn't part of our laptop and we have it movable, we want to settle it into something. There are little stands you can get to put a camera on top of your tabletop, and they vary in height. But if you're not working from a tabletop, or you're behind the camera, you're pointing it at somebody or something else, you're going to need something else, like a tripod or possibly a monopod. Now, tripod is a nice, stable thing to have. 3 legs, pretty much never rock much. You can adjust the height just the way you need pretty much on every tripod there is. Make sure you get something heavy duty enough that it's not going to flex when you set the camera on it. I know there are some real cheap things out there that are light to carry, but this is where you do not want to scrimp at all. If you want to set up in one place, take a long shot or take a set of shots from one angle, tripod will be great for you. On the other hand, if you feel that you're going to be moving around a lot, let's say you're taking video of some kind of sports action, and you still need to set that camera on some kind of stabilization, you might want to skip the tripod and get yourself a monopod. This can extend to any height too, but you've just got one leg, which means instead of picking up a tripod and possibly tripping over one of the legs as you're moving to your next position, wonder who's done that, or I wouldn't know to bring it up, right? The monopod, you pick it up, you set it back down. Yes, you're the other 2 legs of the tripod arrangement that you need because the camera's only sitting on one leg, but it is so much easier to move around, very easy to pivot the camera because you're not loosening anything. You're just pivoting the whole monopod on its point. So those are a couple of different things to look for as basic ways of stabilizing your camera. By the way, if you say, well, I need to stabilize my camera, but my camera is my phone, how am I going to get this screw from the tripod onto my camera? Well, my trick is that I buy some dollar store type selfie sticks, and at the top is a little bracket that screws in with the exact same thread pattern that a tripod has. So now I take it off of that selfie stick, I put that bracket on the top of my tripod, and I can clip my iPhone in and use that as my camera on a really nice tripod. Now that you can get your camera into a desired position, you can work from a predetermined plan, and you should for most projects. You may want to experiment with alternate shots during your production, or you might find that something you thought you could use isn't available. Maybe the park you thought would make a perfect forest scene has a family reunion filling your intended background. But you'll come up very frustrated very quickly if you try to figure out each shot as you go along once you're on the site. You'll also have a very little control over your outcome if you don't have a plan. The usual tools for planning productions are the script and the storyboard. We're emphasizing the visual here, so I want to talk about the storyboard. If you've seen a storyboard before, you kind of think, that looks a little bit like a comic strip. It's got a series of panels, and they contain sketches of key images that you want to have in your video, and then some captions and comments that say, this is what's happening in this scene. This helps you plan camera angles. It helps you plan the lens use. Am I going to be wide here so I show a lot of background? Am I going to be close up so I have a face-to-face shot with just the faces showing? And all of this is in our head and on paper before we even get the camera rolling. That way we know how to set the camera. There's a great article on Canva about building a storyboard, and I'm going to put a link in the show notes for that. All right, that last little bit of information leads us right into looking more closely at our composition. When we're working on our script and we're working on our storyboard, that's when we want to start deciding which shots we want to take. I think I've already said that. But let's get just a little bit deeper so that we can decide exactly how we want to arrange our shots. Part of it will have to do with the angle the camera is viewing from, and part of it will be how we use our lenses, but we can combine those to get some very easy rules down for what we'll get. Some of the easiest types of shots for humans to relate to are the ones that are scaled by the human body. So, for instance, you'll know what I mean instantly if I say some of our shots might be head and shoulders shots, or they could be waist-up shots, or they could be head-to-toe shots. These are ways of just describing how we're showing one or more human bodies on our shot. They don't really account for some of the more dramatic points of view. For instance, we could have an extreme close-up. You've probably seen movie scenes where we simply see a character's eyes or just their lips moving as they speak. Or we might see a landscape that is just enormous, and there are a couple of little tiny flecks in the background or in the foreground moving, and that gives us an idea of the scale of, say, a desert with a couple of people trying to make their way across it. Here are some other basic guidelines for clear camera work that seem to account well for human perception. The first has to do with the eye level of the viewer, which is created by the level of the camera. If the camera is looking up at something, so is the viewer. If it's aimed down at something, the audience is looking down as well. There are common psychological effects of these angles. Viewing from below gives the subject more power, while looking down at our subject gives us a sense that the subject is weaker and vulnerable. Keeping a human to one side of an image may convey the idea that the person in the image should share attention with the landscape or the object that's over their shoulder. Sometimes we even see something that the main character doesn't, like somebody sneaking up on them. And so that is the kind of shot that will include those details that we're supposed to notice. Related to this is an idea that helps us compose no matter what objects are in our picture, and this is the concept of the rule of thirds. If you think of your image as being divided into equal thirds, both horizontally and vertically, so you could say, hey, if I'm scanning across my picture, I think of it as 3/3, or as I'm scanning from top to bottom or bottom to top, I'm thinking of it as 3/3. We've found some great places to place our subject. Maybe you've got a person standing in a nice landscape. You might position them so that they are 1/3 of the way into the picture, either on the left or right. And now we've included the landscape purposely, but that's a very pleasing balance to the eye. We could say that we've got a horizon we've got to place, and it's more desirable to place that horizon 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the picture or 2/3 of the way up from the bottom of the picture than it is to have it cut right across the middle. And then an ideal situation is that time when we have some object that can be placed in the picture where one of the lines that we imagine dividing our picture up into thirds horizontally and one of them that divides the picture up vertically intersect. And so we put that object there and create a pretty good placement, or better yet, we have multiple objects that we can place at those 1/3 marks in a way that balance each other. This is kind of hard to picture when I'm talking about it, and so once again, I found you a good guide that I'm going to put in the show notes, and you can go right out to digitalphotographyschool.com and look at their rule of thirds page. When you're using a camera and want to follow the rule of thirds, you'll find that a lot of cameras actually have the lines for the rule of thirds marked right into their viewfinder. And so as you're getting used to that kind of composition, you can simply position the camera where those lines fall right on the subject, and you know you're aligned and you're great. All right, so it's homework time. You are not going to pick up your camera, go out, shoot your first production, and say, it went as expected without some practice. So whatever camera you use, I want you to get used to it. Now, pick it up. See if it's got those marks for the rule of thirds. See what you've got in the way of zooming. If all you've got is digital zooming, that's fine. Get what you can out of that digital zoom, but create different compositions. Look up at your subject. Look down at your subject. Put your subject on a line for the rule of thirds, on the left, on the right. Have them dominate the picture. Have them dwarfed by the landscape. Practice the kinds of shots you can get with your equipment so that once you know those, it'll be easy for you to, in quotes, call the shots and say, this is how I want this picture to look, and I know how I'm going to get that out of this camera. No discussion of video production would be complete without mentioning lighting. This is a make or break for your production, and it doesn't have to be complicated until you're ready for a fancy setup. Two of the main qualities of light are its direction and its degree of softness. Direction simply refers to whether the lighting on our subject is coming from in front, behind, the side, overhead, multiple points, and so on. The most dramatic effect of light, if you want to get used to this idea, you've seen it before. That's where our light is behind us. I used to see this a lot when I worked in a photo lab. People would take pictures where they thought there was a lot of light. Oh, we'll set our family on the couch here in front of the picture window and then take a picture. Don't need a flash because there's plenty of light. Yes, behind our subjects though. And so it doesn't reflect off the subject's faces and get into the film. And so now we've got silhouettes. And same thing with a digital camera. The camera might adjust so that the faces show up light, but then you've got this enormous, horrible glow behind them. Either way, it's usually undesirable to have silhouettes as family pictures. Well, what else can we do? If our subject is dark, we can turn on our flash to fill them in, but we also want to typically just adjust to suit the lighting we've got. In the case of a subject that was backlit, I would probably move that subject so that I could be on the same side as the light when I point my camera at the subject. That way the light is bouncing off the subject and into the camera, and we get a clear picture. Now, if the light is far to the side or directly overhead, we could have some real undesirable shadows, and there are easy ways to get rid of that. The simplest way for us is to have a reflector. And a reflector is just some lightweight material that is white or very light in color, or if you buy a commercial one, it may even be silvery and reflective, kind of like the vest that people wear if they want to go walking at night. That strip that you see that lets you know from half a mile away, hey, there's somebody on the side of the road. This is the kind of material you can get as a reflector if you know you're going to be doing this kind of thing a lot. And the idea is that you point that reflector in such a way that it's angled kind of between the light source and whoever you have that is on camera, and that light bounces into the shadows and makes a much softer picture. If you don't want to spend the money up front, you don't know how often you're going to be shooting video where you need a reflector, then you can simply get a piece of foam core or poster board from your local art supply store or big box store. If you're not familiar with foam core, it's basically a sandwich of two pieces of poster board with some styrofoam in the middle, and so it won't wobble around the way a piece of poster board would. You just got to make sure that you kind of baby it a little bit so that you don't crumple it as you're packing it in with some of your other supplies. The kinds of things that you're avoiding when you use a reflector are, say, deep shadows under the chin and under the nose, very dark eye sockets, and then wrinkles that show up more than they should, things that are very unflattering. And of course, the camera doesn't always help. Sometimes the camera actually heightens contrast, and so these things stick out more. So you'll have a situation, say, where an actress is lit very well with big soft lights or with reflectors that fill in, and what happens is all the wrinkles disappear. But what that also does is kind of fill in some of the shadows that would show you where cheekbones are and other shape and structure in the face. And so now the face becomes more rounded. So when you hear somebody say, the camera adds 10 pounds, you know that's not actually true. It's typically the lighting that adds the 10 pounds. And this is why you might see, if you watch real closely on some sitcoms, somebody hits big, they get a sitcom, and the next season, they look a little different because now they know this show is coming up. They had to rush into production, but they've had the summer to starve down. And you can tell the difference. Season 2, that actress has lost some weight because she's worried about the camera adding 10 pounds. Don't do that, please. If you're going to be in front of the camera, I love you just the way you are. Now, I mentioned a big light source that is softer. The size of your light source compared to your subject does make a difference. The bigger the light source, the softer it is. There is a way to bounce our light around, and we can make it softer by spreading it out, say, over a white wall or a big reflector. And you can find ways to do that on camera websites. If you want to explore that, that's a little bit beyond what we want to do here. But the simplest way to do this at home is to have sheer curtains over a big window that we're going to use as our light source. If we get our subject close to that light source and that we've got that big window compared to the size of the subject, we're going to have a lot of even light coming in, filling in shadows, very flattering. The only thing to be aware of is that if we have that window to the side of our subject, now we have shadows on the other side of the face. So again, out comes the foam core. Well, who's going to hold the foam core? I'm working alone. Buy yourself a cheapy music stand. Foam core doesn't weigh that much. Tape it to the back of the music stand. Have that thing raised to the eye level of the person. And now you've got a nice soft light source on one side and a reflector to soften the shadows on the other. And you're in good shape. Now, I might decide to do just the opposite. I might decide to have a scene where I have just got a single light lighting that scene. And maybe it only falls on my subject, and there are shadows and dark background, etc., so that overall the scene looks pretty dark, or what we would call in the film or movie industry, it's low key. This doesn't mean relaxed like slang says, but low key is that we've got a predominantly dark picture. If you saw the old Batman movies that Tim Burton made, they were low-key to the point where the fight scene between Batman and the Joker in the church, you couldn't see what was going on a lot because it was so dark. And in fact, if you thought about that movie afterwards, you realized it never was sunny in the movie. It never was bright. The mood of that movie was carried by the fact that the entire thing was shot as low-key. Now, contrast that with an episode of the TV show The Good Place. I can't quite give you the premise because I might give something away. It's worth watching it for its own sake. But if nothing else, watch The Good Place to look at the lighting. And we watch our main character who has supposedly died and supposedly gone to the good place. And it is very light all the way through. Everything is well lit. There aren't many shadows. It always seems to be sunny. And so now we've got a completely different mood, and much of it is created by that key we use, the high key, in our lighting. I will tell you that if you are going to shoot video regularly, you probably will want to look into some of the inexpensive light sets that are out on the market. They will do the job for you, especially now that fluorescent bulbs are a thing. It's not hard to use lower power, cooler lights to get some decent lighting. Most of those sets come with reflectors that go around the lights, come with the stands, and come with diffusers, which are things like the sheer curtain I mentioned before, that'll keep that light pretty soft. Again, I'm not going to give lessons on how to use a 2 and 3 point light setup, etc., but there are sources on the internet. And if you're a little bit more old-fashioned like me, you can even find good books in the library on this kind of thing. But you won't have to spend a whole lot of money. If you're going to be working with movable subjects and light, and your background is too dark, here's one quick tip I'll give you. If I can move my light, and I've got it the right distance from my subject, but my background is too dark, I'm simply going to keep my subject and my light at the same distance from each other, but move them both closer to the background. And now that light that passes my subject, when it hits the background, will be much more intense. I've got a link to a really great camera company where they've given a lesson on lighting techniques, all the basics for cinematography, and I'm going to put that in the show notes. All right, we have a pretty long episode going already. We should stop for now, but of course we're going to need to pick up in another episode because we still have topics like editing, audio, and backgrounds to cover, and we want to make sure we give them enough time. So look for that in another episode. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Get your friends to listen as well. Leave us a review if you can do that on the podcasting platform where you get this podcast. And as always, we want to invite you to look in the show notes for all of the resources that were mentioned. And we'll look for you again next time. Thank you very much for listening. That's all we have for today. This is Dean saying thanks for listening, and we hope to have you back with us next time on Teachers to Tech.